She wasn't the kind of woman men noticed when she walked into a room. Not in the way that stopped conversations, anyway. She didn't wear perfume that arrived before she did. She didn't have legs that went on forever, or collarbones you could write sonnets about. Nora Beckett was the kind of woman who had mastered, over the course of 31 years, the art of disappearing in plain sight. She was soft where the world wanted sharp, round where fashion wanted angles, quiet where ambition demanded noise. She had learned early that invisibility was its own kind of armor, and she had worn it well. She was also, in the estimation of anyone who actually paid attention, the most competent person in the entire Sorvino operation. Not that anyone said it out loud. She kept the books. She tracked the cash flows that moved between 14 shell companies across 3 states. She noticed discrepancies before they became disasters, flagged irregularities before they became investigations, and had once, at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in December, caught an error that would have put 3 men behind bars and cost the organization $4 million. She'd fixed it, filed the correction, gone home, eaten leftover soup, and been back at her desk by 8. No one had thanked her. But no one had gone to prison either. Nora had been working for Emmett Sorvino for 4 years, and in 4 years, she had spoken to the man directly exactly 11 times. She kept count, not because she was sentimental, but because she tracked everything. It was the same part of her brain that catalogued cash flow irregularities. It simply couldn't be turned off. Emmett Sorvino. Even thinking the name felt like pressing your tongue against a loose tooth. An awareness, a slight edge of danger. He was not what you'd call handsome in the conventional sense. His face had too much weather in it, too many years of making decisions that didn't allow for sleep. He was broad through the shoulder and unhurried in the way only very powerful men could afford to be unhurried. He had dark eyes that held information they never surrendered, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something intended to last centuries. He was also, Nora reminded herself on a fairly regular basis, her employer, the head of an organization that was only semi-legal on its best days, a man who had sat across from her exactly 11 times and never once looked at her like she was a person rather than a function. She was the accounting function. She was very good at her job. That was all. She told herself that on the morning of the fundraiser, standing in front of her bathroom mirror in her apartment on Mercer Street, wrestling with the zipper on a dress that had fit 3 months ago at the boutique on Clement and now required both hands and a specific angle of breath-holding to close. The dress was wine-colored, deep and almost burgundy, with a square neckline that she'd chosen because the woman in the shop had said, quietly and without condescension, that neckline was made for a figure like yours. Nora had almost argued. She'd paid for the dress instead. She looked at herself now. The woman in the mirror was not invisible. The wine dress caught the light. Her dark hair was up, pinned with a clip she'd borrowed from her neighbor, and small gold earrings that had been her mother's caught the glow from the bathroom bulb. She looked different. Not smaller, obviously. She was never going to be smaller. But the word that moved through her mind, slow and careful like something she didn't quite trust yet, was present. She looked present. Don't overthink it, she told her reflection. Her reflection looked unconvinced. She was going to the fundraiser because her friend Dex had gotten them tickets. Dexter Lamb, who worked in acquisitions for a legitimate real estate firm and had an inexhaustible enthusiasm for charity events. Because, as he put it, the food is always incredible, and rich people feel guilty, nor it makes them incredibly generous at the bar. Dex was not her boyfriend. He was emphatically not her boyfriend, had been emphatically not her boyfriend for going on 3 years, which was its own complicated thing she was choosing not to examine on an evening when she was already doing enough emotional lifting. He was picking her up at 7. The Alderman Hotel fundraiser was for the Children's Arts Foundation, which meant the venue was the kind of place that had an actual chandelier in the lobby. Not a reproduction, a real one. Venetian, the type you looked at and understood immediately that the world was divided between people who owned chandeliers and people who looked up at them. The ballroom was cream and gold, and the tables had flowers Nora couldn't name, which was unusual because she had a good memory for things, and it bothered her a little that she couldn't name them. White and very tall, with petals that curled slightly at the edge, like they were trying to close around something precious. Dex said something funny about the centerpieces, and she laughed, and it felt good to laugh. And for a while, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. Two friends, a pleasant evening, good food, the kind of wine that cost more per glass than her monthly internet bill. She did not expect to see Emmett Sorvino standing across the ballroom. She should have. The Sorvino organization had its fingers in half the legitimate businesses in the city, and a children's arts charity was exactly the kind of thing that required a check with a great many zeros and a photograph of a powerful man looking magnanimous. She knew this. She should have anticipated it. She hadn't. He was standing with two other men. Callum, his head of security, who had the build of someone who'd once been asked to move a bus by hand, and a city councilman whose name Nora knew from filings and whose presence here was, in her professional estimation, not a coincidence. Emmett was nodding at something the councilman said. He looked as he always looked, like the room was merely where he happened to be standing, and the room should feel honored. Nora turned back to Dex. "I need a refill," she said. "You've barely touched. I really need a refill." They went to the bar. She kept her back to the east side of the room. Dex got a glass of something amber, and Nora got another white wine, and they found their table, which was, in the way the universe occasionally expressed its sense of humor, on the east side of the room. She sat with her shoulders back, because her mother had raised her to sit with her shoulders back, and she watched the centerpiece flowers, and she kept her attention very carefully on Dexter Lamb, who was telling her a story about a closing that had nearly fallen through because someone had put a decimal point in the wrong place. She laughed in the right places. She asked a question. She was very good at paying attention. She was not paying attention to Emmett Sorvino. She was absolutely not noticing that he had moved from the east wall to a table 2 rows over. She was definitely not aware that at some point in the last 10 minutes, the quality of his stillness had changed. That particular stillness she'd catalogued over 11 interactions, the one that meant he was no longer performing patience, but actually experiencing something that had his attention. She reached for her wine. Across the table, Dex was grinning at her. He was a good-looking man, Dexter Lamb, the kind of good-looking that had always felt slightly out of her league, which was its own thing she was not examining tonight. He had a smile that meant what it said, and when he looked at her, and that was its own small gift she had stopped being surprised by. "You look incredible tonight," Dex said. "I should have said it when I picked you up. I got distracted by the traffic." She shook her head. "You don't have to, Nora." He said it like the sentence was complete. "You look incredible." She looked at her wine glass. Something moved in her chest, warm and a little unsteady. "Thank you," she said. She did not look toward the table 2 rows over. She was quite sure of that. What she could not have known, what she had no way of knowing, was that 2 rows over, a man who had not been surprised by anything in approximately 9 years was experiencing something that had no entry in his vocabulary. Emmett Sorvino had recognized her the moment she'd walked in. He hadn't been looking for her. He'd been nodding at something Councillor Bean was saying about zoning variances, and he'd been performing the correct amount of interest, and then something in his peripheral vision had resolved into a shape he knew, a posture he knew, the specific way a person holds their shoulders when they've spent years trying to make themselves smaller. And he'd looked, and then he'd looked again, because the woman who kept his books, the woman who sat in the chair across from his desk and spoke to him about quarterly projections, with the flat affect of someone reading weather reports. The woman he had. He understood with a clarity that was somewhat unwelcome. Never actually seen, was sitting 2 rows away in a wine-dark dress, with her hair up and small gold earrings catching the light, laughing at something the man across from her said. Emmett Sorvino had not built an empire by misreading situations. He was, in the assessment of men who were paid to assess such things, preternaturally good at understanding what he was looking at. He was looking at Nora Beckett. She was beautiful. The understanding arrived without ceremony, without the usual machinery of his brain, arguing it into a shape he could use. It was simply true. She was beautiful. Not in a way he had a template for, not in the way of the women his organization attracted, who came wrapped in the particular aesthetic of danger and display. She was beautiful the way certain things were beautiful when you finally stopped moving fast enough to notice them. A city at 5 in the morning, the specific quality of winter light, something you'd been walking past for years and never stopped for. He picked up his drink. He did not look away. Callum appeared at his shoulder. He always appeared, Callum. At the precise moment, Emmett did not want him to. "The councilman wants another 10 minutes, Callum said quietly. "Tell him I'll find him later." A pause. Callum was very good at pauses. "You all right, boss?" "Fine." Another pause. "You're staring." "I'm not staring. You've been looking at the same table for 4 minutes." Emmett turned to look at Callum, who received the look with the equanimity of a man who had accepted long ago that his job description included being stared at by very dangerous people. 4 minutes, Emmett repeated. "I counted." Emmett looked back toward the table. The man, Dex, whoever he was, whatever he was, had leaned slightly forward and Nora had laughed again. And the laugh was, he could not hear it from here, but he could see what it did to her face, the way it opened something that was usually closed, and he felt something shift in his chest that he did not care for at all. "Find out who the man is," Emmett said. "The one she's with. She's one of ours," Callum said carefully. "The accountant. Beckett. I know who she is. Right." Callum was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to? Just find out who he is." It took Callum 11 minutes. Dexter Lamb. Acquisitions legitimate, not connected to any competing organization. No flag in any database Callum had access to, which was most of them. He reported this to Emmett in low tones, while the ballroom swirled around them, and a string quartet began, something Emmett couldn't identify. "He's nobody," Callum said. "Clean. I see that. So get me another drink, Callum." Callum got him another drink. Emmett stood with it and did not. He told himself, watch Nora Beckett. He watched the room. The room happened to contain Nora Beckett. This was a distinction he was choosing to maintain. The evening moved the way these evenings moved. Speeches, the kind of applause that meant obligation rather than feeling, a dessert course that was architectural in its ambition and modest in its flavor. Emmett signed the check he'd come to sign and spoke to the 3 people he'd come to speak to, and was by any reasonable measure done with the evening. He should leave. He watched Nora stand up to go to the bar with the man, Lamb, and he noted, because he noted everything, the way she moved through the room, the way she seemed to angle herself slightly, as though expecting to take up more space than she was given. The way she smiled at the bartender, a real smile, different from the ones she offered in professional contexts. The way Lamb touched the small of her back for a half-second to guide her around a couple who'd stopped in the middle of the floor, and the way Emmett Sorvino's hand tightened around his glass. He crossed the room. He did not examine the decision. Examining decisions was something he did when the stakes were low enough to afford reflection. When the stakes were higher, he moved. He arrived at the bar at the precise moment Nora turned around with 2 glasses and found him standing 2 feet away. He watched her face go through something quick and complicated. Surprise, then the particular neutral she wore in professional contexts, then something underneath the neutral that she covered so fast he almost missed it. Almost. "Miss Beckett," he said. "Mr. Sorvino." Her voice was entirely steady. He had always respected that about her. "I didn't know you'd be here this evening. I didn't know you would be." She held both wine glasses with the careful grip of someone who had nowhere to put them. The man, Lamb, appeared at her shoulder and looked between them with the specific expression of someone doing rapid arithmetic. "Dex," Nora said, "this is Emmett Sorvino." "He's?" A pause so brief only Emmett would have caught it. "A client, right?" Lamb said. He did not look entirely convinced. He extended a hand anyway. "Dexter Lamb. Good to meet you." Emmett shook it. He looked at Lamb for long enough to communicate, without any particular rudeness, exactly what kind of man was looking at him. Lamb, to his credit, did not back up. "Beautiful event," Lamb said. Emmett said. He looked back at Nora. "You look well, Miss Beckett." There it was again, that quick thing underneath her neutral, there and gone. "Thank you," she said. "Enjoy your evening." She stepped past him, Lamb falling into step beside her, and Emmett turned back to the bar and ordered something he didn't want, and stood with it, and understood, with the unambiguous clarity that had always been his most useful quality, that he was not going to be able to unsee what he'd seen. He left 20 minutes later. He sat in the back of the car while the city moved past the windows, and Callum drove, and the silence was the particular quality of silence that happened when Callum understood there was nothing useful to say. "Lamb," Emmett said, after 10 blocks, "the acquisition man." "Yeah. Is he good to her?" Callum was quiet for a moment. "I don't know enough to say. Find out." "Boss, not like that." Emmett looked out the window. "Just," Callum found out. It took him 3 days. Dexter Lamb was, by all available accounts, a decent man. He had no flags, no history of anything, and 2 women who'd dated him had, when discreetly queried through channels Callum was professionally coy about, described him as really thoughtful and genuinely kind. Just not the right fit. He had, apparently, been trying to get Nora Beckett to go to dinner with him for the better part of a year. Emmett sat with this information on a Wednesday morning in his office and looked at the quarterly projections that Nora had filed the previous afternoon, which were, as always, impeccable, and thought about the fact that this woman had been sitting in this building for 4 years. And he had looked at her the way he looked at functional furniture, which was, to say, with appreciation for its usefulness and no curiosity about its interiority. He called her in. She arrived in 2 minutes. She was always in the building early. Another thing he now realized he'd known without registering, with a tablet and a legal pad, and the expression of someone prepared to discuss numbers. She sat. He looked at her. She waited. She was very good at waiting. She had the patience of someone who had spent a long time not expecting to be addressed. "The Hendricks filing," he said. She consulted nothing. "The amended K1 or the original?" "The amended." "I flagged a discrepancy in the third-party allocations last week. If you've got the original partnership agreement, I can cross-reference before the deadline." "It's the know when it is, of course." She made a note. "Anything else?" He looked at her for a moment longer than the question required. "No," he said. "That's all." She stood, collected the tablet and the pad, and moved toward the door with the particular efficiency she wore like a second outfit. Close-fitting, no room for anything extra. "Mrs. Beckett." She stopped, turned. "The fundraiser," he said. "Last Saturday." Something moved in her face. Small. "Yes?" "You looked." He paused. Not because he didn't know what he wanted to say, because he was choosing how much of it to say. "It was good to see you outside the office." The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds. "Thank you," she said, carefully. She left. She stood in the hallway outside his office for 4 full seconds before she started walking again, and her heart was doing something it had absolutely no business doing, and she told it sternly to stop. it did not stop. The next week was normal, or close to it. She filed the Hendricks Amendment. She handled the payroll variances that'd been quietly developing in the restaurant arm of the operation. She attended 2 standard meetings, spoke to Emmett twice on the phone about logistics she handled with her eyes closed, and tried to locate the place inside herself where the fundraiser had been folded away and examine it from a clinical distance. The clinical distance kept collapsing. She went to dinner with Dex on Thursday. He had finally, after several months of careful circling, asked her to dinner. Actual dinner. Not the friendly dinners they'd been doing, but dinner, with a reservation and a look that meant something. And she had said yes because Dex was a good man, and she was tired. She was so tired of treating her own happiness like something that needed a cost-benefit analysis. He took her to a restaurant called Marigold, which was small and warm, with exposed brick and candles on every table, and a menu written on a chalkboard. And Nora felt herself settle into the chair across from him and thought, this is nice. It was genuinely nice. Dex was funny in ways that were real, not performed, and he looked at her like she was worth looking at, and the pasta was extraordinary. She did not think about Emmett Sorvino. She did not think about the exact quality of his voice when he'd said it was good to see you. She ordered dessert, which was a salted caramel tart, and Dex talked about a deal that was close to closing, and she asked questions, and it was easy. It was so easy, being with someone whose world didn't require her to be careful. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She glanced down. Unknown number, but the prefix was one she recognized. Callum used a rotating set of them. I'm sorry, she said to Dex. 1 second. She stepped away from the table to a small corridor near the restrooms and answered, Mrs. Beckett. Emmett's voice, not Callum's. Low. Something in it she couldn't catalogue. Mr. Sorvino. She kept her voice even. I know what time it is. A pause. Where are you? She blinked. I'm sorry. Where are you right now? I'm at dinner. She paused. Is there a work emergency? Because if the Hendricks filing... It's not the Hendricks filing. Silence. Mr. Sorvino, are you alone? 3 words. She felt them arrange themselves in her chest in a formation she wasn't prepared for. No, she said. Another pause. Longer. She could hear, faintly, the city behind him. He was outside somewhere, or in a car. The man from the fundraiser, he said. It wasn't a question. Dex, she said carefully. Yes. What followed was a silence of such specific quality that Nora Beckett, who could read balance sheets the way other people read novels, understood exactly what she was hearing. I see, Emmett said very quietly. Is there something work-related I can help you with tonight? She asked, and was proud of how steady her voice was. No. A beat. Enjoy your evening, Miss Beckett. He ended the call. She stood in the corridor for a moment, her phone in her hand, and the warmth of Marigold Restaurant wrapped around her, and she thought about a lot of things, very quickly and in the wrong order. She went back to the table. Dex looked at her. Everything okay? Yes, she said. Completely fine. I'm sorry. Work? Always, she said, and smiled, and it was a real enough smile that it probably passed. She did not fully taste the rest of the salted caramel tart, which was a shame, because it had been exceptional. The next morning she arrived at the Sorvino building at 8:15. She badged in, rode the elevator, sat at her desk, opened the Hendricks file and 3 others, and had been working for approximately 40 minutes when Callum appeared in her doorway. He wants to see you, Callum said. She saved her work. She gathered nothing. There was nothing work-related that required gathering, which she noted, and she went upstairs. Emmett was standing at the window when she came in. This was unusual. He was almost always at the desk. The window was 11 floors up, and from it you could see a particular wedge of the city, the rooftops, the water tower on the building across the street, the early morning sky doing something pale and uncertain. Close the door, he said. She closed it. He turned. He looked at her with the focused attention he usually reserved for people who were about to tell him something's important. "I owe you an apology," he said. This was so far outside any framework she had for conversations with this man that she simply looked at him for a moment. "The phone call last night," he continued. "It wasn't appropriate. It was a personal call, not a professional one, and I made it at a time when you were clearly not available, and He stopped. She had never heard him stop mid-sentence before. "I should not have called." She took a breath. "Mr. Sorvino, Emmett." Another unregistered pause landed softly between them. "Emmett," she said, and the name felt strange in her mouth in the way that true things sometimes did. "I've worked here for 4 years. I know. In 4 years, you've spoken to me directly 11 times. Something moved in his expression. "You counted. I count things. It's part of my job." She looked at him steadily. "What I'm asking is, what changed? Because something changed. And I don't know if it happened at the fundraiser or before the fundraiser or if I'm..." She stopped herself from saying imagining it, because she wasn't imagining it, and she was tired of performing the version of herself that would have. "I'd like to know," she finished, directly. The room was very quiet. Emmett Sorvino crossed to his desk and sat on the edge of it. Another thing he never did, the desk was a boundary, and looked at her. "I saw you in that room," he said, "and I understood something I should have understood a long time ago." "What's that?" "That I have been looking at you for 4 years without seeing you." He said it plainly, without adornment, the way he said all true things, and that is not something I can locate an excuse for. The warmth that moved through her was complicated. She had spent a long time being unseen. She knew, better than most, how easy it was for a certain kind of woman to become part of the architecture of a place. Useful, present, and fundamentally unregistered, she had made a kind of peace with it, or she'd told herself she had. She looked at Emmett Sorvino, who was looking back at her, with the full, undefended attention of a man who was not accustomed to being undefended about anything. "Dex," she said carefully, "is a good man." "I know," Emmett said. "Callum tells me he's kind, thoughtful." She blinked. "You looked into him, yes. No apology in it, but no aggression either. Simply fact. I wanted to know if he was good to you." "That's," she searched for the word. "Overstepping," he said. "I know what it is." She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. "And what did Callum say?" "That he's decent." A pause. "That he'd been trying to take you to dinner for the better part of a year." "He had," she said. "You said yes." "I said yes." She met his eyes. "Because he looked at me like I was worth looking at." The silence that fell between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that held things, the way good rooms held light. Emmett Sorvino did not look away. "I need you to understand," Nora said, "that I am not the woman who waits to be noticed. Not anymore." She said it without heat, without performance. Simply as a fact she was submitting for the record. "I spent a long time being very small, Mr. Sorvino, Emmett. I spent a long time believing I was lucky to be in any room I was in. I do not believe that anymore." She paused. "I wore that dress because I wanted to feel present, and I did. I felt present, and then you called me from outside Marigold at 8:30 on a Thursday night, and I felt." She stopped. "What did you feel?" he asked, quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. "Like I wanted to know what you were going to say," she said, "and I hated that. Because I'd been having a perfectly nice dinner with a genuinely good man, and you called, and I wanted to know what you were going to say." Emmett was very still. "I have not been fair to you," he said. "Not in the way I conducted myself, and not in the way I..." He stopped again, and this time let it be a stop rather than a sentence. "I am not good at this," he said finally. "This particular territory, I noticed." Something that was almost, a smile moved through his expression. "You notice everything. It's a professional hazard." He stood from the edge of the desk. He was tall, this man. She knew that. She had always known that. But in this room, without the buffer of the desk between them, she was aware of it differently. "I'm not asking you to make any decision," he said. "I'm not asking you to stop having dinner with decent men who were paying attention before I was." He said it evenly, and she heard the effort in the evenness. "I'm asking you to let me begin to correct the record." Nora Beckett stood in the middle of Emmett Sorvino's office on a grey Friday morning, and she thought about the girl she'd been 10 years ago, who had learned not to take up space, and the woman she was now, who had worn a wine-dark dress and let herself feel present, and she thought about all the things she'd kept inside herself like careful files, organized, labeled, put away. "You can begin to correct the record," she said. He nodded. He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer. He had the restraint of a man who understood that some things couldn't be rushed, or shouldn't be, and she noted that too. "The Hendricks Amendment," she said. "I need the original partnership agreement before the 14th. I'll have Callum get it to you today. Thank you." She moved toward the door. "Mrs. Beckett." She turned. "One last time this morning, with all its reversals." "Nora," she said. He looked at her. "If you're correcting the record," she said, "you should probably know my name." She left him standing in his office with the city grey and wide behind him, and something on his face she had never seen there before, through 11 meetings, through 4 years of careful invisibility, through every quarterly report and amended filing and late-night correction she had made in the name of an organization that had never once looked at her. Something that looked unmistakably like a man who understood exactly what he stood to lose.